My name's Sandy McNair. I'm the president of Altus Insite. We started this business 15 years ago, and we are the market information provider for the Canadian environment. What that means in more English language is all the office buildings, all the industrial buildings across Canada. We've been tracking what's been going on in them for the last 12 years. Most of that information's online, and from that comes a wealth of perspective. And our client base includes the lenders, the owners, the brokerage community, the pension funds, the assessment authorities, and then a host of other suppliers to the industry. We're having a lot of fun. In 1978, I was the executive assistant to a very entrepreneurial developer by the name of Harold Shipp. And I didn't know at the time, but it's the most dangerous job you can have just out of school, because everyone else in the firm wanted to see you fail a little because you had so much access to the boss. Within 18 months, I was fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to create and run the commercial division in what until that time had been a residential firm. So within my first 3 years out of school, I got to do a 300,000 foot office building in Mississauga and a 600,000 foot office building in Etobicoke, both on spec, and fortunately we got them to 70% leased by opening day. I learned that you could accomplish just about anything if you're fully committed. And I mean the committed in both senses of the word, in terms of emotionally committed and your energy and so on, but also committed in that you have to be a little bit crazy. Don't take yourself or anyone else too seriously. Toughest job I ever had was in November 15th, 1989. We'd spent the period between 1983 and 1989 building a firm. It was a group of partners and myself, and we'd built it from 11 employees to 240. And very sadly, on November 15th, 89, I had to grab the reins and we had to let go of 40 people. It was awful, but it was necessary in order to save the remaining 200 jobs. Also in '89, my father and I were going to put up a 40-unit apartment building in Bracebridge, and the music changed fast enough before we became overly committed, and so fortunately that one didn't go ahead. Actually, my fearless forecast is both. I think the business community is going to be positive, but I think the consumer sentiment's going to be more negative, and so I think we're going to have a very mixed up environment for the next year. I think there's more people are moving into sort of solutions, and sometimes that's the global from soup to nuts, but I think if you can organize your firm to be both a la carte and turnkey, and let the client choose, I think that's really the best of both environments, because there is still some fairly significant price sensitivity out there, and yet there are also another end of the marketplace that wants the full strategic partner treatment. So I don't think the marketplace is all the way one way or all the way the other, so being wise enough and having your affairs internally organized enough that you can be both at the same time isn't easy, but I think it's going to be pretty rewarding for those that are able to do it. In our business, we chose a quarterly subscription model, and that allowed us to not get into extensive contracts and long-winded commitments. It put the pressure squarely on us to not only provide the data, but also provide the perspective and all the advice that we could. We've never pulled back from anyone that wanted more and more of our time, and so far that's worked great for us. So I don't know what the parallel is in the mainstream advisory business, but being a little more fulsome and not being afraid of being put to too much work might be part of the answer going forward. Yeah, I think we're going to see a barbell effect where there'll be a few giant firms, and then we're going to see a number of very successful smaller boutiques and pretty much nothing in the middle. To be a successful boutique, you're going to have extraordinary people doing extraordinarily powerful things, and usually on a fairly narrow basis. You can't be all things to all people and be exceptionally good if you're going to be a small shop. So I think we'll see that barbell effect happen, and the middle will get cleared out pretty quickly if it hasn't already. Overbrokered in probably two senses: number of firms and number of people. It's pretty rare that people seem to leave our industry. I was fortunate enough to start back in 1978, and the first batch of guys that I worked with back then are still all in the business. Which is really quite remarkable. A few have retired, but almost everyone of my age vintage is still in the business and has not transferred out to other sectors or other industries or left in any way. So I think that's kind of interesting. That creates a bit of a challenge for those behind us. There was a dark decade where high tech and others took the spotlight, and our sector didn't really attract many people. I don't think that's as much of an issue today, but I think we're probably over-brokered in the sense of a bunch of guys trying to offer the same thing the same way to the same people. And I think the need for differentiation, and hence either the bigger firm with a more of a turnkey kind of capability or a smaller firm with a very focused offering. And I think some people need to figure out which one of those two they are. Don't be afraid of working too hard. Be patient, more patient than most of your peers. There's actually a tremendous amount to learn. And it's more important that you get yourself into a position where you can learn a lot than in a position where you can make a lot quickly. I think there's two things going on. One, we've got a different generation of product. The product that I was first involved with back in the 70s was pretty much the same as what had been built since the late 60s. And the stuff up until, say, 2 or 3 years ago was pretty much the same as that. There were differences, but they weren't an order of magnitude step. There is now something completely different. When you can offer 220 temperature control zones per floor, that's something completely different. When you can accommodate 100 square feet per person and end up with high satisfaction scores, that's something really quite different. So I think that will create pressure on the bottom end of our market, the product that's 30 plus years old and has maybe not received much love. And so whether that stuff gets massively retrofitted or gets converted to something else or just disappears, I don't know. So I think that's going to be an order of magnitude change that most of us haven't seen in our careers. The second thing going on is that in the past, most of the advisory community was successful at getting it down to a short list and convincing the prospective tenant that it really didn't matter which one of these 4 or 5 buildings they went into. They were all going to be pretty much the same, and the only thing left was price. So let's go beat up on the landlords and see who will bend on price. And I think we're now entering the era where people come to understand that that's completely wrong. That quality of fit is actually incredibly important, that the ability to retain and attract employees is incredibly important, and that the landlord has a role and the advisor to the tenant has a huge role in helping the tenant make a good quality of fit decision. The CBD downtown story is actually quite fascinating because it's not as simple as any of us want to think. Downtown's enjoyed about 5 million feet of new development over the last few years. Meanwhile, 905 had about 15 million feet of development, which no one made much noise about. And it was absolutely huge over, say, a 12-year period. We had the privilege of interviewing 107 of about the 120 lead tenants, LEAD tenants that kicked off those buildings, and to find out what was their motive. And certainly realty taxes and access to employees who wanted to have a barbecue in the backyard was part of the story. But the single biggest thing they cited was access to the airport. So, of all the things that are happening downtown, whether it's the condo community, the cultural investments, the street life, the rail link, if, as, and when it finally happens, could be one of the most significant things that happens in terms of migration of office workers to the core. I think it's going to vary. It depends. There's going to be many answers in many different sectors. I think that there's many variables that drive all of this bus, from exchange rate to interest rates to what's going on in Europe to what's going on in the States. But the single most important thing to Canada and Toronto specifically is immigration. If immigration keeps powering ahead and Canada continues to be an attractive place for others in the world, our situation will remain positive. If immigration pulls back, even by from 100,000 to 50,000, that would have a huge ripple effect, regardless of what else is going on in our exports to the United States or natural resources exports to China, India, and the rest of the world. So immigration, I think, is the one variable to watch if you've got your eye on something, and I think that will drive whether there's a pricing correction or anything else that happens. There's many different U.S. real estate markets. Some of them may have already started to turn emotionally or from an optimism perspective, but there's a tremendous amount of damage to be undone there. And the sentiment in both the business community and the consumer side of things is, I've never seen it grimmer. Sometimes those horribly grim and dark forecasts don't affix themselves instantly, but they get much faster than was initially anticipated. So don't write the United States off, but they do have some pretty big funk to get out of. A lot of definition questions come up when you ask that. I think it's certainly, again, a really attractive place. It's safe. It's a great place to educate your kids. It's a great place to do a whole bunch of things. So yes, I think it is a world-class city in terms of livability and all of that. I think we've got lots of questions, like many other jurisdictions, and lots of challenges. But Toronto's a pretty spectacular place, and Canada's a pretty terrific place to be in. They often have a stereotype that might be, I don't know what it is, or it's the igloo stereotype, or it's so tiny and empty. The kinder, gentler is a really nice way to come at it, and I think they're also a little more sensitive today to hearing that. We don't have a favorite restaurant because we like to go to different ones all the time. So it's the adventure of finding yet another one that's good. The Ferris wheel is one of those ideas that you have in the shower, and by the time you've dried off, you put it in the ideas that don't deserve to get much oxygen. No. Any mountain that I haven't been to in the wintertime and Muskoka in the summertime. It would have to be my father. He dropped out of high school to start his own business and did not have a lot of formal education. When he sort of retired for the first time, he decided he'd like to buy and sell real estate. He eventually decided to become a real estate agent, was terrified about writing the exam, and in the end not only wrote that exam but wrote the broker's exam and went on to teach both courses. So while he might not have been book smart, he was incredibly wise, and he taught me an awful lot about the importance of people skills. As the most indulged generation ever. I am, and if I'm not, it's 100% my fault. It's up to us to define how we have fun, and it's up to us to shape the things that need to be done. That doesn't mean it's going to be a barrel of monkeys or fun every single day of every single minute, but it's up to us to decide what we do and how we do it and make sure we have fun at it. I don't think Altus is going to be buying anyone in the near term, but I'm not sure that CoStar's the natural acquirer either. There's Thomson Reuters, there's lots of other firms that are in the data business as well. And then again, it may be a management buyout. So there's lots of different scenarios that could happen. I think they could employ those, I'm biased of course, but I think they could employ those dollars doing a greater job of interpretation and forecasting on the raw data. I think being in the raw data gathering business, much like if we go to the investment bankers, no one would imagine not subscribing to the TSX feed or the Dow Jones feed. And correspondingly, they would also not imagine having no research function. So it's what you do on top of the raw data that matters, not the collection of raw data. It could go the other way, and the MLS might become more useful and functional. But yes, the alternative is there as well. In fact, Toronto is pretty much the exception across the country. Name your city, there's very little involvement. Right today, it's a pretty expensive lapel pin. I do. I met Lorne a long time ago when I was at a career crossroads, and he was kind enough to take a cold call from me. I was absolutely a nobody, and he was very much a somebody. And his ability and comfort at giving back to the industry and doing micro-mentoring was very important to me, and I think is one of the things that makes our industry better.